The 198th Alabama Baptist State Convention is now back in session. And I want to recognize Dr. Rick Lance for a report of the Executive Director and the State Board of Missions.
I'm behind you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. Each year we gather. There's only been one exception of each year we've gathered, and that is last year. Since our inception in 1823, we've been consecutively meeting. But there were a lot of ifs, ands, and buts and uncertainties last year. So let me try to be able to explain exactly where we are in the life of your State Board of Missions. As you hear recommendations later, I would just like to kind of flesh things out. Now, all of us have been children. We weren't grown 30 years old. We were children. And as children, we like all kinds of superheroes. There are many of them today. In fact, there's so many, it's really kind of hard for me to keep up with them. But back in my time, there was really one superhero, and you can guess it. He's Superman. When I was a little boy, my mother and father gave me a Superman outfit. And somehow or another, I felt so overcome with the power of having an S on my chest that I went out to the front porch of our house and I made a dive toward the front yard thinking that I was going to be able to fly like Superman. Well, when I hit the ground, reality set in. There's only one Superman and he's fictitious. And by the way, I never put that Superman outfit on again. You have your own superheroes, your children may have them, but certainly we know that we can't be superhero-centric. We can't center our lives on a fictitious character. The second intriguing fact about childhood is I love Westerns. I love war stories and Westerns. Now, for those of you who are relatively young, the man on your left there is known as John Wayne. And I was intrigued by John Wayne. In fact, one time he made the statement, he was asked a question about his acting tips. He said, there are two things you need to do in acting. Learn how to walk and learn how to talk. And he said, I'd add a third one, you better learn how to ride a horse. Well, he was pretty good at it. And you can see as he's facing us, his left eye has a patch. In 2010, Jeff Bridges did a remake of what was then True Grit of the 1969 version. Now, this is the only time I'll be able to say this, and forgive me if this casts a bad light on me and on the witness, but Jeff Bridges did better than John Wayne. In fact, if I had told that to some people who are no longer with us, they would have thought I was talking about the world being flat. Everybody thought John Wayne was the tops. But Jeff Bridges, and if you'll notice, the patch moved from the left eye in 69 to the right eye in 2010. Alongside those two in the Western genre is the irrepressible, always identifiable Clint Eastwood. And he always, we got some supporters there. There's one thing about Clint Eastwood, every villain made his day. He was always at it. One scene in one of his movies, he's standing on a front porch and a guy with a knife comes up behind him, and without turning around, Clint Eastwood said, that knife is going to look funny sticking out of your ear. Famous line from Clint Eastwood. Well, perhaps one of my all-time favorite Westerns is Tombstone, the OK Corral. Kurt Russell really did an authentically good job of portraying the legend of Wyatt Earp. It was not a terribly short movie, not a terribly long one, but it just lived up to the billing of what you might describe as a true Western in the sense of the legend of the West. Well, you can't live a cowboy-centered life or a Western legend-centered life. But there's another group we need to look at. These we move from fictional, theatrical, to real individuals. Up to the left there is Dwight D Eisenhower. General Eisenhower, later to become President Eisenhower, was in charge of the entire European North African campaign in World War II. He was known as a diplomatic general. That is, he could take people on the Allies' side, the Brits, the French, the Poles, all of them, and hold things together. So he's very diplomatic. He had a consensus-building approach to leadership, much to learn from a quiet fellow who never really liked the spotlight, especially when he was president. There are many leadership skills we could learn from him and tips. The one to his right is a legend in his own mind, and that's General Douglas MacArthur. General MacArthur had a long lineage in terms of being in the American military. He was in the Philippines when Pearl Harbor was bombed, Guam was bombed, and the Philippines was attacked. And the unknown fact about all that is the people on the Philippines were depending upon the Navy at Pearl Harbor to rescue them in the event of a Japanese invasion. Well, there was nothing left there at Pearl Harbor to speak of. And though he was isolated along with thousands of U.S. troops and some Filipino-American troops who fought alongside him, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, you have to come and move to Australia. You start operations there. Now, at that time, the footprint was all over South Pacific. Everywhere you looked, you had the Japanese flag. Those two men are really iconic. The one at the bottom left, though, is the most intriguing. George C. Patton did not know what opposition meant, and no one could tell him he couldn't do something. He volunteered, the Third Army, he volunteered them to make a push when nobody else would do it. The Brits said, can't be done. And he pushed through the enemy lines, and because of that, he said some controversial things, even about his allies. And, well, you can imagine President Truman, by the time President Truman became president, had to make sure that he was silenced. Now, we move to another General Eisenhower and Colin Powell. He's the kind of person that exhibited a military humility that a lot of those in the military could never, ever obtain. He was the one who charted what was called the Gulf War, and it lasted 78 hours. It was a lot of strength compacted in the military and full force of the United States military to do its business in Kuwait, and the war was over, the conflict was over in 72 hours. These men are historical figures, but we can't live a general or military-centered life. Look further. If you're in Alabama, you know what coaches mean. In fact, when I'm out of state, someone will say, how is Coach Saban doing, or whoever is at Auburn, now Coach Harsin, how are they doing? And they couldn't tell you who the governor of Alabama was. And in Alabama, that's just the way it is. In fact, coaches in Alabama, Tommy Tuberville being one of them, can get elected to office, even though he didn't live here very long. But we cannot live a coaches-centered life. No way. We also remember Billy Graham. If you're of any age, you remember him. He died in 2018 at almost 100 years of age. Now, look at the pictures of him. The younger version, very flamboyant, very dramatic in a lot of ways. He was influenced highly by one Billy Sunday and others. Mordecai Ham had been his pastor. He had had a remarkably miraculous conversion experience. And then in his midlife, he was already being accepted by even popular culture at that particular day. And then this version of Billy Graham is the last we saw. My wife and I, and our youngest daughter, made way to the last Billy Graham crusade in 2005. It was held at Corona Park, where the United Nations began. There were at least 300 languages spoken. And as I was sitting in the audience there in the Queens in Corona, my wife and daughter had to be seated somewhere else. I'm seated, and I look around, and I'm the only Anglo in the general area. Thankfully, some of them, others spoke English. And I related it to them that this man right there was a uniter of ethnic groups and intercultural relationships better than any figure in the life and ministry for the Lord Jesus Christ. I have to tell you that in 2005, he stunned me because I'd already been in 2004 at the crusade in Southern California, and that was supposed to be his last one. I wanted to go to his last one, and a deacon friend of mine got me there. But then he announced he's going to be in New York, and he leaned over to me, the deacon did, and said, "You're on your own." So in 2005, we were on our own. I could tell you some rather comic stories, but I better not, related to that. But I read something recently that bothered me. On the western side of Ukraine, very close to the Russian border, there's an area there that has declared Billy Graham and Charles Haddon Spurgeon as extremists. How much our world has changed. We know we cannot, iconic as he may be, we cannot have a Billy Graham-centered life or any pastor or person. When that happens, you have unhealthy situations in a church or in a Christian movement. Here comes the reality. We have to live the kind of life right here that is depicted so admirably by Jim Caviezel, more authentic, I believe, more authenticity in his role-playing of Jesus than any I've ever seen. And we look at the cross. We look at him breaking bread, and of course the empty tomb. The Christ-centered life. When Jesus said, "Abide in me and I will abide in you," that's Christ-centeredness. When Paul says we are in Christ Jesus, that is Christ-centeredness. Fleshing that out is difficult to do, but the scriptures are our textbook on how to do it. I want to transition toward the State Board of Missions, how we're trying to be Christ-focused and Christ-centered. One Mission Alabama has 7 missional initiatives voted on by your State Board of Missions, and they will be our guide path in the future. The first one I'd like to mention is obviously spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is needed. All of us know that. We can nod approvingly. Spiritual awakening, spiritual renewal, we need it. We need it in our individual lives and our lives of our homes and family. We need it in our associations and churches. We need it in our state convention, and we need it in the entirety of the Southern Baptist Convention and all of evangelical Christendom. We need spiritual renewal. The fact about spiritual renewal is usually when there are adverse circumstances, more people are ready for and have gotten themselves in a condition to experience what that literally means. So it's not necessarily an action point that we have, but ever and always in our minds and in our hearts, we're thinking, focused on the fact we have to be renewed in Christ over and over again. He's the only one who can renew. He's the only one who can revive. He's the only one that can bring renewal and revival. Missional objective number 2, making disciples. Now, that is a key phrase, of course, out of the Great Commission that we have. It's the imperative in the Great Commission. Making disciples is something we all try to do, whether we do it knowingly or unknowingly, whether we're intentional or unintentional. It'd be better for us to know it and then be intentional about it, but we're all, in some form, having a witness to others, some believers, some not, in order to make disciples. Now, evangelism and discipleship often are delineated, and for our understanding, perhaps needs to be. Our Office of Evangelism, in the course of this next year and beyond, will be looking at an effort called Gospel to Everyone, similar to what you've read about in the Etowah Association, Craig Carlisle, Director of Missions. We're going to try our best to carry this across the state and contact people one-on-one and in person to the degree we can. That initiative you'll hear more about in early part of 22, and keep that in mind. Furthermore, making disciples encompasses something else. Our Sunday school office has a booklet you may have seen at the exhibit hall, 4 Invitations by Jesus. And it's a great read. Mark Gainey, collaborating with Andy Frazier, and also Daniel Edmonds. I would recommend you read it. It's a concise way of understanding discipleship. Alongside that, we know that we have a college family, that is as much as 300,000 college students or more in Alabama. This year, and you'll see a video in a few minutes, this year is the 100th anniversary of collegiate ministry in Alabama. So that would mean in 1921, before there was a cooperative program, before there were a lot of things, campus ministry, collegiate ministry began right here in Alabama, and we're among the oldest there is in campus work and collegiate work. The third initiative, as you look at it, would certainly be important to us, and that's church health. Church health encompasses revitalization, planting, and replanting. I have a theory, and perhaps you're experiencing it. I believe coming out of the twindemic, the two forms of coronavirus, every church to some extent needs church revitalization. And we have someone in an Office of Church Revitalization, Rob Jackson, who will be glad to help come alongside you and do what he can to be a consultant to you, to be an encourager to you, and give you some process-oriented approach to what we would call church revitalization. But something else you need to know about that effort of church health. In Alabama, we have been reported to us that in Alabama, we have the largest network of church planters of the state conventions who handle church planting themselves as a state convention ministry. Now, thank you. We are quite much in terms of intentionality towards church planting, but we're equally concerned about replanting. And let me just illustrate, a lot of you probably already have thought about this, but we see our churches go through life cycles, just like humans do, and especially in urban areas, but it's happening in rural and small town areas as well. They have a life cycle. Rather than letting that legacy just die with a congregation maybe that is not compatible with the neighborhood and aging out, rather than just let those congregations die or the facilities be left unused, it would be a seamless transition, like we've seen across this state, for a church that is on the edge of being able to be in hospice and going out of business, so to speak. If we could replant a congregation, an intercultural, cross-cultural congregation oftentimes in that particular facility and that particular area, we would be glad to try to help you do that. We're getting a little better at it, and replanting is the future as well. Following church health, we have calling out the called. I love this concept. I know we cannot do a calling. God calls us. Our first calling is to conversion. Our next calling, for those of us who are ministers, we're called to preach or to be a minister. Then there comes specific calls when you are called to be at a church or be on a staff or pastor somewhere, or in my case, state missions and state missionary work. But calling out the called means that we try to pray the same prayer Jesus challenged his disciples to pray in his ministry. Pray to the Lord of the harvest, that he might bring forth out of that harvest individuals who are called to continue Great Commission ministries wherever they are and wherever they go. Christ-centered Great Commission ministries. And calling out the called, we have an effort that we're launching soon called the Timothy Initiative. What that means is that we're trying to find, I guess you would call special operations if you're in the military. We're trying to take juniors and seniors in college, get them together and be mentored so that they can make a missional difference in whatever their major is in college and wherever they go next. They will have had intentional mentoring on a higher scale, if you will, by our collegiate leaders. Calling out the called, the Timothy Initiative. Our next one, of course, is biblical stewardship, and that is word chosen. The word stewardship has become kind of foggy, and a little bit nebulous in some people's minds. But all of our life is about being stewardship, being stewards of what God has given us, all of it. But in this effort, right there, we can re-energize and refocus on being good biblical stewards individually in the local church and also through state conventions and our national family, the Southern Baptist family. And one way to do that is giving through the cooperative program. I have two little quick announcements for you. Some have heard this, some have not. By the end of this year, early next year, Alabama Baptists will have given $1.5 billion through the cooperative program since 1925. I'll say this because you're the ones who bring this about, and many others you represent. But Alabama Baptists remain the number one largest contributing state convention in the SBC. In fact, the last time I checked, we're $3.5 million ahead of any other state convention. Another way to say that, almost exactly 10% of the CP budget on the SBC level comes from Alabama Baptist. That's you. A little more than 5 years ago, we inaugurated our first state missions offering, taking the WMU offering, the offering we had for disaster relief, and we wedded it, naming it after Martha Myers, and already had Kathleen Mallory for the WMU, put it together, and we have this year, as of last year, the same, because we've been in this COVID period. Our goal was $1.2 million. Last week, we checked, and we have received right now $1,202,000, and the year end is not over. Thank you. We really do need to train our people to be good stewards. It helps the local church. It helps every level of life and Baptist life. It helps the kingdom of God. This one next is an important one as well. We are awakening in our culture a growing concern, as we should, about those who've been traumatized related to sexual abuse. This is something we've never taken lightly on the State Board of Missions. In fact, our research tells us that the State Board of Missions began helping train churches and lead out in resourcing of our churches in 1990. We began doing that. Now, most recently, we have partnered with Ministry Safe, an outstanding organization which helps churches, helps larger bodies like state conventions to do the very best they can to help our churches, to assist our churches in being trained on how to prevent it and then how to deal with it when the regrettable situation happens. I want you to hear a little video from Greg Love, representing Ministry Safe. He wanted to bring greetings.
My name is Gregory Love, one of the founders and directors of Ministry Safe. Over the last 30 years, I've been working with camps, schools, nonprofits, youth sports organizations, and lots of religious organizations to help design and implement safety systems to prevent child sexual abuse. Now, in that 30 years of work related to child sexual abuse, I know this. The risk of child sexual abuse in ministries and churches is real, even Baptist churches. Now, given a lot of the headlines in the last couple of years about child sexual abuse, many organizations are just now waking up to the risk of child sexual abuse. The Alabama State Board of Missions is not one of them. The ALS-BOM has been proactively working to equip Alabama Baptist churches and ministry leaders with the information to implement safety systems and to correctly respond to sexual abuse allegations. At Ministry Safe, we've been partnering with Dr. Lance and his team for the last several years to train the mission board staff, to equip churches with tools and resources, to provide live trainings all over the state of Alabama. In fact, 2 more trainings are scheduled for the spring. Now, in addition to the live trainings, we've done several online live stream trainings, given some of the restrictions on live gatherings. The efforts in Alabama have never slowed. Together with the Alabama State Board of Missions, we've done a great deal, but there's still much more to do. We look forward to our ongoing relationship with the Alabama Baptists to prevent well and to respond well.
Thank you, Greg. And we are intentional about a relationship with them. They are good at what they do, and it will help us be better at what we need to do. The seventh missional initiative, authorized by State Board of Missions, is Intercultural Relations. Now, that covers the whole landscape. It's just not ethnic oriented, it's culturally oriented. We have more and more of our churches across our landscape of Alabama who are multicultural, intercultural. And what we like to do is see that number increase. But furthermore, we need a much more self-improving, organizationally improving effort to make sure Alabama Baptists are open to all of our brothers and sisters as we serve Christ together. We're intentional about that, and we want you to know it. In fact, we have, in the recent years, really have done our best to reach down to, if you will, the younger age, not that that's condescending, but go to the younger aged African Americans who are leaders to help them become church planters. And I'm here to tell you, that's one of the reasons we have the largest training group, is because of the response of groups of African Americans and others. But one I want to tell you about being Hispanic, and his name is Ramon Vielza. Ramon has the I-10 church in Baldwin, and he relates also to Mobile. He's helped us. He represents some 24 Hispanic churches that we have started right now. And in intercultural relations, men like him and so many others are helping us beyond mission with the Great Commission. And here's what we dedicate ourselves to do. These 7 missional initiatives represents the heart of what your state missions group will be trying to do. Your state missionaries will be trying to achieve for the glory of God in our future. But ever and always, we remember, we have one mission, the Great Commission. We have one program, the cooperative program, and we have many ministries, Great Commission ministries. So could you say that with me? One mission, the Great Commission. One program, the cooperative program. Many ministries, Great Commission ministries. Thank you.